Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to unpack the true and honestly often really disruptive forces driving technological change. We hear so much buzz every day about artificial intelligence and green tech, right? Well, today we're pulling back the curtain. We're going to look at the deep economic forces driving these shifts and ask a pretty uncomfortable question. When the world changes overnight, who actually pays the price?
You know, it's incredibly tempting to look at technological progress as just this smooth upward trajectory. We've all heard the optimistic myth, right? A new invention arrives, sure, there's a little bit of friction, but ultimately it naturally creates way more jobs than it destroys, and everybody wins in the end. But what if we're totally misreading the next technological revolution by looking at it through those rose-tinted glasses? Well, the data and history suggest we just might be.
So, here's our roadmap for today. We're covering the automation myth, history's warning signs, AI and global divergence, Wright's law and batteries, and finally, the geopolitics of tech.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, the automation myth. It's time we question the idea that creative destruction is an automatic win for everybody. To really wrap our heads around this, we need to look at the work of researchers Benjamin Schneider and Hilary Vipond. In their deep dive into historical automation, they basically dismantle the idea that new tech comes without severe, long-lasting human costs. You see, economists love to point back to the first industrial revolution as proof that, hey, everything works out in the end. But Schneider and Vipond argue that if you actually look closely at those historical shocks, you realize that's the only way to understand the true intergenerational impact of having your job replaced by a machine. And that brings us right to Section 2. History's warning signs. Because the anxieties we have today about our AI-driven fourth industrial revolution, they have some very deep, unmistakable echoes in the first. Get this, way back in 1589, the stocking frame was actually blocked by Queen Elizabeth I. Why? Because she was literally terrified it would turn her subjects into beggars. Then in the 1770s, workers physically destroyed spinning jennies. In the 1830s, during the Captain's Swing riots, agricultural threshing machines were completely smashed to pieces. Jump forward to the 1970s, and you see longshoremen fighting tooth and nail against the containerization of shipping. We almost always label this kind of resistance as just blind ignorance, the classic Luddite narrative. But Schneider and Vipond's research shows it was actually a highly rational response. These workers knew their skills were being devalued. Their incomes were totally threatened. They weren't just blindly blocking progress, they were desperately trying to shape the adoption of a technology that was coming for their livelihoods. And this brilliantly illustrates the real human cost, 150,000. That is the massive number of British boot-making jobs wiped out by mechanization in the 19th century. Now yes, the new factories did create about 142,000 new jobs, so on paper, the net loss looks pretty small, right? But here is the absolute kicker. Those displaced, highly skilled bootmakers rarely actually got the newly created factory jobs. Their specialized skills were suddenly completely obsolete, leaving them to face permanent, structural unemployment. The incumbents were, quite simply, left behind. So, let's fast forward to today with Section 3, AI and global divergence. We're shifting from 19th century Britain to a modern economic forecast from the International Monetary Fund to see how tech is creating winners and losers on a global scale. The IMF presents this fascinating little micro-story. Picture two totally identical warehouses. One is in a rich country, the other is in a developing country. In the rich country, human wages are high, so the financial incentive to spend heavily on smart, labor-replacing AI and robots, it's absolutely massive. They automate, productivity goes through the roof, and the cost of goods drops. But over in the developing country, human labor is cheap. There's virtually zero incentive to drop millions of dollars on robots when you can just pay low wages to local workers. So what happens? The rich country takes this huge leap forward in productivity, while the developing country just stagnates. The exact same AI technology exists globally, but basic economic incentives mean the rich just get richer, sparking this massive, accelerating global divergence. And this poses a terrifying risk for developing regions, especially Africa. For decades, economists have been hyping up Africa's demographic dividend, this massive, young, energetic labor force that was expected to take over global low-skilled manufacturing as populations in Asia get older. But think about it. What happens if AI and robotics just completely eliminate the need for those low-skilled jobs entirely? The IMF is warning that this highly anticipated demographic dividend could turn into a demographic liability. Having a booming young population with literally no starter jobs to step into, that could completely stall the economic development of entire nations. Okay, so we've seen how software and AI can totally upend labor. But what about the physical stuff? Let's move to Section 4, Wright's Law and batteries, and look at the transition to electric vehicles.
To understand why the future looks the way it does, you really have to understand Wright's Law. Back in 1936, Theodore Wright noticed something incredible. With every single doubling of aircraft production, the cost to make a new one dropped by about 15%. To put it simply, what you make a lot of gets cheaper to make. Making things drives experience, and that experience drives radical compounding efficiency.
Now, we all know Moore's Law, right? Computing power doubles every 18 months. But Wright's Law is how the physical world works. It's a self-reinforcing cycle of scale, learning, and cost reduction. And this perfectly explains the current battle between battery-powered cars and hydrogen-powered cars. Right now, hydrogen costs about $36 per kilogram in places like California. It's insanely expensive. It's trapped in this classic chicken and egg scenario. Without huge scale, costs stay high, but those high costs prevent anyone from building to a huge scale. Batteries, though, they had laptops and cell phones to fund their early days. We built millions and millions of them, which triggered Wright's Law. We rode this incredible experience curve that caused battery costs to just absolutely plummet.
Which brings us to this absolutely crucial number, $80 per kilowatt hour. Goldman Sachs projects that EV battery prices are going to hit this stunningly low figure by 2026. Why is this a game changer? Because at $80 a kilowatt hour, electric vehicles will hit cost parity with traditional gas-powered cars in the US, completely unsubsidized. No tax credits needed. The physical tech will literally just be cheaper, driven relentlessly downward by the sheer massive scale of global production.
And that brings us to our final and arguably most important section, the geopolitics of tech. What do plummeting battery costs and AI divergence actually mean for global power? To answer that, we have to look really impartially at international industrial policy. China has zeroed in on what they call their new three industries: electric vehicles, batteries, and solar cells. The state heavily subsidizes the entire supply chain for these specific technologies. And geopolitically, this isn't just about trying to sell more cars to people. They are treating these sectors as the absolute foundational technologies required to project economic, financial, and military power in the coming decades. By aggressively scaling up production, they are hyper-accelerating Wright's Law, pushing their costs down faster than anyone else on Earth, and basically securing dominance over the physical building blocks of the future.
The economist Noah Smith actually makes a really provocative point about this exact dynamic. He argues that while Western nations, places like the US and Canada, are bogged down in these heavy partisan domestic battles over whether to repeal climate policies or roll back EV subsidies, they are completely missing the bigger picture. Smith's argument is that failing to compete in battery and solar manufacturing isn't just a failure on climate, it's actively ceding the physical technologies of the future to a geopolitical rival. From his perspective, fighting these policies based purely on domestic political instinct is a massive misreading of a technological revolution, kind of like how the Japanese auto industry completely misread the shift away from hydrogen.
Which leaves us with this final, striking question to think about. Is your nation treating things like electrification and automation merely as a domestic policy debate? Just another climate issue or a labor squabble? Or are they treating it as a fundamental issue of national greatness and survival? Because as history shows us time and time again, technological transitions are absolutely ruthless to those who misread them. Whether you're a 19th century bootmaker, a developing nation banking on a demographic dividend, or a global superpower ignoring Wright's Law. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you in the next one.